Place your bets. Intellivision Archive returns with some more 1980 fun. The Intellivision continued its fall campaign, first visited in the last episode's discussion of Sea Battle and Space Battle, with 3 more games published around November. While none of today's games, Horse Racing, NASL Soccer, and Word Fun, could be considered big hits for Mattel, they nonetheless represent the company's continued push along multiple axes. You've got a game for small children, a game designed for adults, and another serving as an all-ages sports title. And we'll start things off here with the companion piece for the platform's educational launch title, Math Fun. Word Fun, or to use its official license, the electric company Word Fun, is really a collection of a few different word-based games aimed at children learning to read. All the hallmarks from 1979's Math Fun are here: cute animals, colorful graphics, and ostensible educational value. Much like its sibling, this features the electric company license, that being an educational television program that had produced new episodes from 1971 through 1977. Mattel was really making clear that these educational games were great for kids in their newspaper advertisements, really shoring up the notion that the Intellivision has something for everyone. According to the Blue Sky Rangers website, this game was written by Kevin Miller. No one has been able to track him down, myself included, but we can glean a few things from interviews with other former staff with developer APH Consulting. According to David Rolfe's interview with the Intellivisionaries Podcast, APH routinely brought in Caltech students as summer hires to work on Intellivision programs during the console's first couple years in development. Miller was apparently one of these students, having developed backgammon and assisting Ken Smith on finishing NFL football in time for its release. On Atari Age, a user under the handle Walter Ives wrote in December 2022 that Children's Television Workshop, the production company behind the electric company, exerted significant content control over Math Fun, and while he didn't speak to Word Fun, it seems pretty likely that this game was produced under similar constraints for something easygoing and non-threatening. While I don't know Walter Ives' true identity for certain, I do understand that they have an insider's perspective that is worth noting here. This is a 2-player game, and forgive the footage as I had to play solo, but it's a pretty good one. Crosswords is essentially Scrabble but without point bonuses. You simply score a point for each letter in the word that you're spelling. Using the keypad, you select if your word will go in horizontally or vertically, then key in your letters using the keypad. If you can't find any words with them, you can skip your turn for a whole new batch. There's no in-game check for word spelling or acceptability, so once you've confirmed your word, it's up to your opponent to agree to its validity, which may involve checking the dictionary according to the manual. This means that if you want, you can really play this using any language that involves Roman letters, or allowing proper nouns, or whatever house rules you feel like. First player to 20 points wins the game. Word Hunt is a 5-round game where you get 3 minutes for each player to try and assemble 3 words using the letters on screen and a pair of monkeys. Using the side buttons, you pick up the letters, drag them back down, and drop them off. Once you've formed a word, you can hit enter to go on to the next line. You can also backspace using the keypad to remove letters in case of a typo or an inability to finish the word, as letters get replaced as they're used. There's also a little trash can in the center of the screen to drop off unwanted letters in. At the end of 3 minutes, the players must decide whether or not they accept their opponent's words as valid, much as in crosswords, and valid words are given points. This is a neat game, but having to play it solo, I think it loses a step from the frenzy that clearly a 2-player match would bring on. The final game on the cartridge is Word Rockets. Using one of the 2 wagons, you pick up a vowel from the bottom of the screen and fire it off at a word moving at a random speed and height across the sky. If you hit and form a real word, you score a point. The letter will bounce off if it isn't an actual word, and of course missing gets you nothing. First to 50 points wins the game. This is another one that is likely pretty frenetic with 2 players, and honestly I could see this as a standout of this cartridge. Honestly, of all the educational games I've had to play through this video series, Word Fun might be the best of all of them. The game modes are compelling and make for an interesting approach to edutainment, even if I suspect relying on a sibling or a friend to approve your scoring opportunities in good faith might be a mistake. Word Fun did not sell particularly well, which is not too surprising given the niche audience it was targeting. According to an internal Mattel memo tracking cartridge shipments through June 1983, only 13,000 copies of this game went out in 1980, and while these numbers improved in subsequent years, by the end of the tracking period, only 134,700 Word Fun cartridges went out to stores. Only Roulette, Checkers, Reversey, Royal Dealer, Sharpshot, and Shark Shark had smaller sales figures, with the latter three releasing around the end of the year into early 1983, and therefore only having a short period of time to be counted. As early as 1981, you can find newspaper ads from stores indicating that Intellivision buyers could get this as a free game, or alternately the similarly poor-selling Checkers and Math Fun. The game did end up having a revival of sorts late in the Intellivision's life, as much of its code was reused as the basis for the INTV cartridge Learning Fun 2. That said, it did review fairly well to the extent that it was reviewed at all, with Video Games Player and Electronic Fun with Computers and Games each scoring it highly in the graphics and playability categories of their video game scorecards. I did also come across a December 23, 1980 review from the Daily Post, a newspaper published in Merseyside, England. The author, Sue Reed, wrote about both Word Fun and its counterpart Math Fun from the perspective of 13 primary school students testing the games out. The kids really seemed to enjoy both games, particularly Word Fun, and indicated that having spent 90 minutes with the games, they would have happily spent 90 minutes more. Word Fun is one of the few Intellivision games that did not work on the Intellivision 2 hardware revision. This was not intended, but rather a side effect of Mattel's hardware changes designed to prevent Coleco's third-party releases from working on the console. Marketing reportedly didn't feel that Word Fun was important enough to hold up the release of the hardware revision, and based on Word Fun's anemic sales, this was a fair assessment. Because of this, Mattel offered a trade-in program for any other game in the Intellivision library. According to the Blue Sky Rangers website, some kids used this to get a bunch of new games for cheap by buying the heavily discounted Word Fun from local stores and turning it around to trade in immediately. Kevin Miller was also responsible for our second game this episode, NASL Soccer. Licensed by the North American Soccer League, this was essentially at the tail end of the first big push to get Americans interested in soccer that took place in the 1970s, thanks to globally known players such as Pele, who played for the New York Cosmos in the middle of the decade. So while soccer may not have been a particularly popular sport compared to baseball or football at the time, a soccer cartridge did make marketing sense. At the time of its development and release, there weren't a lot of soccer games on the market that weren't just variations of Pong. Magnavox had its soccer game for the Odyssey 2 on the market in 1979, which does feature passing and dynamic player control, like you always operate the closest player to the ball. But in practice, it's pretty confusing to play a match. You're constantly changing players, and actually aiming the ball where you want it to go is trickier than it seems. Atari published its coin-op Atari Soccer game earlier in 1980, too late to have been any influence on Mattel or APH. Given the timing, it's likely Miller was charting his own path forward on developing this game. That said, there are some interesting parallels to NFL football, which, as mentioned, Miller worked on alongside Ken Smith. Specifically, Smith said Miller worked on the football field and the scrolling routine in that cartridge, an experience that either informed NASL Soccer or was informed by NASL Soccer, depending on when this cartridge was developed in relation to football. Whichever the case, the same top-notch scrolling work from that experience can be seen here. Much as in football, the soccer field is well rendered here with effective use of negative space to draw an in-motion soccer ball. Though in an odd quirk, any player that scrolls off-screen will reappear on the opposite side, effectively wrapping around and ensuring that you never see a true breakaway. This is to make up for the fact that the game only ever has 3 players per team on screen at a time, and creates the illusion that you actually have a full 11-player team. It's certainly a more convincing approach than the basic 3 versus 3 approach Atari would take in 1981's Championship Soccer a few short months after NASL Soccer's release. This was, unsurprisingly, part of the tack taken by Mattel in its comparison commercials. In spite of the Intellivision's limitations, NASL Soccer is a pretty fast-paced take on the sport. The screen wrap ensures there's always something for each player to do, and while it's tricky to get the hang of using the pass and shoot buttons on the disc to fire off the ball where you want it to go, it feels incredibly good to successfully pass it to a teammate or to get it into the goal, or to intercept the pass. The defender can use the side buttons to get the goalkeeper to lunge from side to side, which is a very welcome mechanic given that this is the era of either no keepers or brain-dead ones. Though if you're unprepared, it's still pretty easy for the ball to get right by them. The game even features a nice sudden death mode that shuffles you directly to a 7.5 minute long overtime period, in case you don't want to play out the full 90-minute soccer match. While it's not actually 90 minutes, it's still a pretty long period of time. NASL Soccer was fairly well received at the time. In the July 1982 edition of Electronic Games, Bill Kunkel and Arnie Katz wrote that the scrolling playfield ensured that the limited players on screen didn't affect the strategy of the cartridge, as the arrangement taken allows you to kick a pass or shoot off screen and have a player ready on the other side to intercept it. With mechanical niceties such as corner kicks, free kicks, and goal kicks, NASL Soccer could evoke the feeling of real soccer, they wrote, resulting in an innovative cartridge. In Video Games' May 1983 roundup of sports games, they considered this worthy competition for Atari's Real Sports Soccer for the 5200, a newer and more capable platform. They considered this a great title for those looking for a more realistic simulation of the sport than competing takes on the game. The game also received A ratings in the scorecards published in both Video Games Player and Electronic Fun with Computers and Games. While not a hot seller for Mattel, NASL Soccer did respectably well. The cartridge sold 54,200 copies in its first year and ended the tracking period at about 284,200 copies sold. This makes it the lowest selling of the sports games Mattel sold in this period, but it still makes it the best-selling game of this video. The game's write-up in the UK-based TV Gamer magazine suggests that it commonly was sold either with the Intellivision, or it was at the least quite a popular choice for buyers. So it does seem likely that the game had some legs in areas where soccer is more popular. This is incidentally the last game of Kevin Miller's we'll be seeing in the series. It appears that if he did come back to APH in the future, he did not work on Intellivision products. Mattel had looked into selling an enhanced version of this game for the Intellivision ECS model, known as the Super NASL Soccer, which would allow for 1 to 4 players. This was being developed at the company's French offices. After Mattel Electronics was disbanded in early 1984, that office spun off as Nice Ideas and retained the rights to their work, eventually completing this as a regular Intellivision cartridge titled World Cup Soccer, published in Europe by Dextel and later in the US by INTV. In addition to a computer opponent, this does add in a few new maneuvers such as heading the ball and tackling that weren't in the original game. Additionally, NASL Soccer served as the inspiration for one of Mattel's first releases on the Atari VCS, 1982's International Soccer. The perspective is shifted vertically to account for the hardware limitations, but the combination of slow movement speeds and no permanent goalkeepers means that this is a significantly more aggressive version of the sport than its predecessor. Of all the Mattel releases for the VCS in 1982, this was the worst seller by far, shipping just shy of 53,000 units that year, and wrapping at only 68,500 in June 1983, a drop of 6,000 games from May, suggesting this was one Mattel had seen more returns than sales of. Our final game in this video is Horse Racing, developed by Chris Hawley. Hawley was likely another summer hire, as this is one of his only 2 credits for the Intellivision, and a person with his name appears in a scanned Caltech 1982 yearbook. This is one of the few horse racing gambling games available on home consoles at the time, with the rest essentially being indie cassette games for the Bally Professional Arcade. Even with those in mind, the Intellivision cartridge is remarkably well thought out for what it is. Hawley is another person who has yet to be tracked down, though according to the aforementioned Walter Ives, APH was given no direction beyond a horse racing theme, and it was difficult to come up with a compelling game. On its face, this is a simple gambling game. You make bets on the horse races, and win or lose money depending on the outcomes. Walter Ives called this, as it was developed, a game of wits, for those who enjoy analyzing horse racing statistics and using that analysis to inform their betting. With this in mind, horse racing is ideally played with other people, as there's only so much enjoyment you're going to get out of seeing if you can best the computer. Upon boot up, the game generates a lineup of 8 horses for a 10-race card in varying conditions, such as a clean, dry track, a turf one, or a muddy one. Each horse has its own strength and endurance statistics that only become apparent over the course of those races, which means that as you place your bets, you can analyze the results to generate handicaps. On the flip side, only 4 horses run in a given race and are randomly chosen by the computer, which leaves potential wild cards to upset your planning. And finally, there's the player aspect itself. When the horses are running, each player assumes control of one of them, with the computer taking over the rest. You can push your horse's speed throughout the race, but if you exhaust their energy, you'll be stuck with a slow trot to the finish line. Once the race is over, the computer handles the bets, and whichever player ends the 10 races with the biggest wallet is the winner. This is a hard game for me to weigh in on, as I don't really have experience betting on horse racing, but the amount of options here are quite nice. You can bet solely on who wins each race, or make an exacta bet, wagering on who finishes first and second at a 15-to-1 payoff. You have $750 to play with at the start of the game, which, if you're me, will rapidly dwindle because you're bad at horse betting. The first two horses are always computer controlled, while players take over the bottom two. The players functioning as jockeys can use the top button to coax a little extra speed out of their horse at the cost of some stamina for as long as they hold down the button, useful early in the race to jockey for position, and the bottom button uses the whip to cause your horse to sprint at top speed, primarily used for the last furlong or two of the course. The computer always knows when to use these functions to prevent their horses from tiring out, but of course you and players just have to figure it out by experience. So how did horse racing do? For such a niche title, not too shabbily. 36,400 copies were shipped in 1980, with 251,000 total by mid-83. Anecdotally, it appears to have had a following in the betting industry. Atari Age user Maserati posted about how his father, who was in the horse racing industry, bought an Intellivision just for this game, and that they knew other folks in the same field who picked up the console just for it as the only horse racing game commercially available. This is reflected in the contemporaneous reviews for the cartridge. In the May 1982 Electronic Games, Kunkel and Katz wrote that no other horse racing game on the market, even those for computers, offered this specific blend of luck and skill. They added that this was the best gambling game on the market, period, as it is far more involving than any of the card games being sold on cartridges. Jumping ahead a decade, Joe Santulli wrote in the Digital Press fanzine that this was among their best of the Intellivision, and that it remained the best and only horse racing simulator on cartridge systems. On the flip side, it received middling scores for playability in the Electronic Fun with Computers and Games and Video Game Players scorecards, even though both magazines liked its visuals. While all three of these games may be a bit unremarkable and unassuming in the year 2023, they all contributed to the Intellivision's identity as a platform for the types of games you couldn't really play elsewhere. The simulation aspects of NASL Soccer and horse racing were wholly unique at the time, and Word Fun is really a better effort at an interesting educational game than we've seen before this point on consoles. They may not be to everyone's tastes, but it's a solid lineup as Mattel closes in on the end of the year. Next time, we close out 1980 and start things off right in 1981.